Welcome to the Darkstream, Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and Infogalactic News. Not a whole lot going on at the moment. I think it's interesting to see that there's not as much hysteria in the media about the North Korean situation, despite the fact that nothing has improved. The only thing that's happened is that Kim Jong-un has demonstrated the capability to launch nuclear missiles farther than they had believed before. So I'm kind of, it's interesting to think about how people are getting wrapped up in everything from the hacking attack with the NSA tools to more nonsense related to Trump and the Russians and all that sort of thing, Comey and whatnot. Meanwhile, the North Koreans just demonstrated that they can probably nuke Hawaii, certainly can hit Beijing, Tokyo, part of Russia, and possibly even the West Coast. And so, I'm a little astonished that that people are still paying attention to all these petty things when there's a real prospect for a significant and prospectively terrible war. So, anyhow, but yeah, on the other hand, it's also probably true that there's not really much to talk about. There's only so much discussion of what could happen that's possible. Yes, there are still ships in the Pacific. So anyhow, we'll just have to wait and see, and hopefully things won't get too bad. But yeah, I've seen a couple of you commenting on the shirt. I am still not tired of winning. I think that people are getting too impatient. I should probably mention Ann Coulter's recent column, where she was talking about how she was afraid that the Trump haters are right, and so forth. I don't think that's correct. I don't. As I have been saying from the beginning, the task is considerably greater than most people understand. Anne is up to something. I think that's entirely possible. That's true. Mike Cernovich says that something big is coming soon. And it does look quite. I do think that there probably is a shakeup in mind. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. I don't believe that it's going to include Bannon. That strikes me as wishful thinking by the media. I do think that there's a very good chance that, and I hope that Trump is going to get rid of a number of the moderates. It wouldn't be a surprise. Obviously people expect Spicer to go. He hasn't proved himself to be very, very competent, and hopefully Reince Priebus will be going as well. I doubt we're going to see any significant changes in the military areas, although certainly there should be some sort of changes in the NSA. I think that whoever is involved in the leaking is going to be removed very quickly, because one thing that we know about Trump is he is a loyalist. Somebody who is known for their loyalty tends to be unusually intolerant of disloyalty. One thing that people have commented on many times is the loyalty between me and the Dread Ilk. You know, a lot of people, some of them with much bigger followings than I have expressed a degree of envy for the way that my supporters and my followers always show up and are always reliable. And I very much appreciate that. But part of that is because I'm loyal to them. You know, it has to go, loyalty is always a two-way street. And so Trump is known for his loyalty. He demonstrated his loyalty to people, especially during the campaign, when he could have thrown people under the bus, and he very pointedly refused to do so. But what that means, and what some of those people in the administration should have understood, is that anyone who gives that kind of loyalty expects that kind of loyalty. So, yeah, I think that Flynn was treated pretty well. A lot of people complained about that, but I didn't see any reason, and I have absolutely no doubt that Flynn was involved in whatever decision. And yeah, I like what that commenter just said about how Trump tried working things out the normal way. That is actually a very good sign. A lot of people don't realize it. The sign of a serious man is someone who tries to work things out reasonably before he goes and steamrolls everybody. Okay, the kind of men, we'll get to that. We'll get to that leftist. You know, a reasonable man, an experienced man, a strong man, has always tries as a first option to reach a reasonable conclusion. You know, Trump went in there, he was elected, you know, he was clearly the president, he was, you know, clearly had the right to do whatever he wanted, and yet he still chose to try to work with people. And he has found that they're not actually willing to work with him. And so I did nothing to my sound. That's Periscope, not my system. So anyhow, Trump has made a strong and significant effort to work with the establishment. And they have, for the most part, simply spit in his face. And so what I expect that he is going to do, we'll find out, but what I expect that he's going to do is I expect that he's going to become consistently more hardline, not all at once, but in a measured and consistent manner, giving them the opportunity to play along, because that's what he prefers to do. The kind of people, you know, anytime you're talking to people that are just significant, serious hardliners, they tend to be gammas. They tend to be low status guys who have no experience of leadership, no experience of being in a position, a responsible position, where other people are depending upon you. And so they plan the whole thing, they play everything out in their heads. And they I would do this, and I would do this, and I would demand this. The thing is, of course, that's why they turn out to be such petty dictators whenever they get any power. And that's also why they tend to be complete disasters, because they think that leadership means I'm the leader, I get to tell everyone what to do. And that just doesn't work. And so Trump is serious about, let's go ahead and address the lefty here. Trump is serious about improving economic conditions for working people. You know, the problem is that most of the ideas that people have for improving the working conditions, or improving the economic conditions for working people, are bad ideas and are doomed to failure. You know, a lot of, I mean, we won't get into the details, but I've written an entire book about, there's a whole chapter in my book, Return of the Great Depression. It's called No One Knows Anything. And I demonstrate very clearly, and with historical economic facts released by the relevant economic authorities, and I show that the margin of error is considerably greater than the difference between growth and contraction. So it is absolutely impossible to make any sort of reasonable decision, policy decision, based on the numbers that are being reported. So how do you, when you don't even know, when your margin of error is so great that you don't even know if what you're doing is causing the economy to grow or contract, how can you possibly come up with a reasonable policy? How can you tweak policy in order to benefit people, stuff that's several layers deep in the process? It's not possible. Now, Trump is doing, here's what a lot of people on both the right and the left don't want to admit. If we want to have economic growth, then we have to do two things. Number one, we have to get rid of whatever you want to call this relatively free trade. And you also have to get rid of immigration, and you have to deport large numbers of immigrants. Immigrants of the quality that we've had over the last 50 years absolutely destroy the economy. They are net negative, and it's not even close. And that's not even counting the fact that all the additional expenses that it was kind of funny. In Sweden, they're running into huge budget problems because they've just discovered that all these migrants that they supposedly needed, because our birth rates are low, we need more people. We'll allow all these Syrians and other Arabs to come in. Well, guess what? Less than 1% of them are employed. And so, but that's the point. They're not even getting cheap labor, and the brown underclass that they've gotten are not at all compliant. And so it's a complete disaster. You look at California, you look at Sweden, and you can see that the basic assumptions that we've had about economics and immigration are completely wrong, are completely false. And so, I don't think, Trump is a civic nationalist. He's not alt-right. And so I don't think that he has the conceptual model that will permit him to do what really needs to be done. I think he's also, on the financial side, he's got too much, the problem is, well, of course you can, but you need to keep in mind that, see, you're a leftist, so you naturally want to find an expert with credentials to tell you what to do. That's how the left thinks. But it's irrelevant. What matters is who is right and who is observably not. It doesn't matter if there's 100% consensus among economists saying that immigration is good for the economy. We know that it isn't. You know that it isn't. All you have to do is look at it. How do you know? Look at who predicts what's going to happen. I predicted the 2008 financial crisis. I was one of about 14 economic writers who did. I predicted it back in 2002, very clearly. It doesn't take a great brain to understand that we have a huge debt issue right now. And part of the problem, just to be fair to the economists, when you read Steve Keen's book, either of them, the new one or the older one, and the older one's a bit technical, then what you can see is that, again, you're completely wrong. Again, you're saying, oh, they've had a negligible impact, blah, blah, blah. But they're basing that decision on bad statistics. Remember what I want. Yes, I know that's the stats. I'm telling you that the stats are utter fiction. And you can verify this for yourself. All you need to do is look at each of the GDP reports. In the US, they come out with, it used to be 4, I think it's 3 now, for each quarter. All you got to do is keep track of those 3 reports for each quarter, and what you will see is that the margin of error is greater than the difference between growth and contraction. Not only that, but if you keep track of the history of them, and I do, what you'll find out is, in fact, how many of you, okay, go ahead and hit, we're going to do a little test here. Everybody stop, don't hit any hearts. Don't hit any hearts. That's still hitting hearts. I want you to stop hitting hearts for a second, okay? I'm going to ask 2 questions, and I want you to hit the hearts when the answer to the question is yes. So the first question is, how many of you believe that there was a economic recession in 2001 in the United States? How many of you remember that? How many of you believe that that was the case? Go ahead and hit the hearts if you agree. Okay, so we have a pretty strong consensus here that if you don't recall, just don't say anything. This was 2001. Now, so we have a pretty strong consensus. Okay, stop, no more hearts. Stop with the hearts. Okay. So I swear there's like 1 or 2 last one. Now, how many of you, don't remember, how many of you are sure that there was no recession in 2001? Okay, so you guys saw the difference there, right? A lot of people remember the 2001 recession. You know, everybody recalls it. I recall it. That sort of thing. Well, guess what? If you go and you look up the GDP statistics now, because they've been revised several times, there was no economic recession. There were no 2 quarters of economic contraction, two consecutive quarters of economic contraction in 2001. Okay? Now the answer is there was, in statistical terms, there was a economic contraction. There was a recession in 2001. But because the numbers have been so massaged and modified since then, that recession no longer exists. Even though you can go on Google and type in 2001 recession. Go ahead, somebody do that. Type into Google and then see if it says anything about a recession in 2001. See what I mean? So that, my leftist friend, is what you're dealing with. Considering that they statistically made a recession vanish in only 15 years, how can you possibly put any credence in using those very statistics? Yes, you can go back to doing whatever you want. How can you justify any policy interpretation at all on the basis of these contradictory and therefore obviously false statistics? You can't. It gets worse though. It gets worse. Right now we're just talking about the observable statistics. We're talking about the practical side, right? Well, let me go ahead and blow your mind a little bit. You just tap on the screen, I think, to do the hearts. Let me blow your mind a little bit. And that is, I'll tell you why the wages have been stagnating and negative since 1973 in a minute. The thing that should blow your mind is the entire basis for the conventional economic models is false. All of those models And this is not a right-wing versus left-wing thing. All of those models, going back to the original law of supply and demand, Adam Smith's law of supply and demand, all of them are based on a false assumption that demand is stackable. You know, the whole idea is that you can take my demand curve and add it to your demand curve. And so you add these things together, and then that gives us a macro curve for the entire economy. But that doesn't work because the fundamental math is wrong. That's what Steve Keencott talks about. And that's why when I wrote a column about him in his book, I said he you know, I don't agree with him on everything. He's more of a bit more of the left. We tend to agree on debt in general. You know, he thinks that government can do something effective about it. I don't. But where I really admire his work is the fact that he went out. You know, he detected. I mean, I detected kind of the same BS, but I never really thought to look into that one. But he demonstrates very clearly that demand is not stackable, and therefore the law of supply and demand does not apply at all. Now, we already knew to a certain extent that it was bullshit. We already knew that because of what they called luxury consumption goods. Okay? Think about it. See, that's what I mean. It's mind-blowing. It completely changes our fundamental understanding of economics. And so, anyhow, now we already had the hints. I mean, the reason I was always a little bit dubious about the supply and demand curve is that it just doesn't apply to certain types of goods. Think about it. Would you rather have Apple stock when it's cheap? Is the demand for Apple stock higher or lower when it's cheap than when it's expensive? It's much higher when it's expensive. That's completely contradictory to the law of supply and demand. Now, they tried to come up, there's a term, I can't recall the term right at the moment, it's a type of good. It was like Veblen and conspicuous consumption got into it a little bit. They came up with a special name for these type of goods to which it didn't apply. But it's also true of, it's not just true of investment stuff, it's true of, you know, a Ferrari. You know, the more expensive a Ferrari gets, the more people want it. And so, no, it has nothing to do with planned obsolescence. It's it's a type of good. Yeah, Bitcoin's another example. So anyhow, to get back to immigration, this is where 1973 comes in. Who? Well, we won't play the guessing game. I'll just tell you. The reason that wages peaked in 1973 is that starting in 1951, starting in 1950, the women began entering the workforce. Basically, young women began entering the workforce. And between 1950 and 1973, the number of women in the workforce doubled. It went from 1/3 of women to 2/3 of all women working in the workforce, most of them young. You know, they used to get married and so forth, and have kids. Instead, they went to college and got into the workforce. So it was basically the middle and upper middle class. You know, the working class women had always worked. Now, the reason that it didn't affect wages negatively at that point was because old men were leaving the workforce. Men used to work much later. And so what was happening is that the size of the workforce was not changing very much. It was growing, but it was growing at about the same rate as the economy. So what happened was the young women came into the workforce, the old men left. However, in 1973, that was when that transition process completed. And so you had immigrants coming in, you know, because the laws changed in 1965. You started seeing the immigrant boom, and the old men stopped leaving the workforce. And so essentially what we traded was a workforce that was heavily male And so what we have now is that instead of having families, young women work in order to support old men out playing golf. And so that is why the wage rates fell. Also, it didn't help that it didn't help at all that that women did not, immigrants, at least when they come in, they might lower wages, but they also they do increase consumption a bit. Women are already consuming, and so when they enter the workforce, there's no increase in consumption to balance the increase in supply. So, so that means that their effect has to be negative. It's going to suppress wages. And so if you want to help the working class, one of the best things that you can do is to reduce the number of women in the workforce and get them back getting married, having families, and so forth. Also, that will lead to a higher quality workforce because one of the little understood effects of this mass post-1965 immigration is that it has lowered the average IQ of the American people by somewhere between 4 to 8 IQ points. And so, this is absolutely disastrous, but most people don't even realize that it's happened. So, anyhow, we completely failed to get to the point. That's okay. We don't have to. This is not any sort of formal structured thing. So I appreciate the questions, and I'm always happy to answer questions, and it's nice to get to kick around some economic concepts here and there. So anyhow, have a good evening. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll just add on one final note. I'm very excited to see what's coming up soon with these big things that Cernovich is talking about. So have a good evening and buona serata.